Welcome and thank you for listening to the Sales Maven Show. I'm your host, Nikki Roush, your own personal sales maven, here to offer you tips, techniques, and strategies to master your sales conversation. Today is one of our Mastering Excellence series. This is where I interview an expert and dig into, based on my background of neurolinguistic programming, how does this person achieve exceptional results in some area of their life or business? What is the structure behind it? I then look for that structure, we'll comment on it, and the idea is that you can leave here and start to apply these same principles to your own life or business so that you can get exceptional results for you as well. So let me introduce you to our guest today. It is Dan Englander. Now, Dan is the CEO and founder of Sales Schema. It's a fractional new business team for marketing agencies, and he hosts the Digital Agency Growth Podcast. Previously, Dan was the first employee head of the new business at Idea Rocket, and before that, an account coordinator at DX Agency. He's also the author of Relationship Sales at Scale: How to Find Your Virtual Tribe and Reliably Grow Your Professional Service Business, Mastering Account Management, and the B2B Sales Blueprint. In his spare time, he enjoys developing new aches and pains via Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and spending time with his wife, Sarah, and their son, Adrian, in New York City. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Nikki, thank you so much for having me on. Appreciate it.
I'm so excited to have this conversation. Now, Dan is, just for you as the listener, he is going out on a limb here and diving in with this Mastering Excellence series for me. So I really appreciate it. And we're just meeting for the first time. So I am going to get to know as much about Dan as you do as we listen to this episode. And, we've had a brief conversation here, but I'm very excited to learn more about you and specifically like how it is that you do what you do. The topic we're going to talk about is how to look to the past so that you're able to use that to look to the future. But before we actually go there, I'm sure there's so much more that you could share about who you are and a little bit about your background, in addition to what I've shared about your bio. So tell us a little bit more about you and how you work with clients and all that good stuff.
Yeah, thanks for the great intro, Nikki. My background's like, grew up in Northern Virginia. I won't go through my whole life story, but basically like went to college in Santa Cruz, moved to New York out of college, worked some internships, got fired from one for not being cool enough because it was like the dawn of hipsterdom and it was a music promotions company. And they said that they moved around the schedule, even though it was an unpaid internship. So anyway, like I kind of landed in the dustbin of the agency world answering, like problems on Facebook walls for consumer packaged goods clients. And it was back when you could say we do social media management and like companies would give you all their money. So that was kind of like the first random job I had. Moved on from there to leading business development for like a creative services agency. And, was one of the first employees there and helped them grow and win a bunch of big clients and stuff. And then, around like, when was this? This would have been like 2013, 2014. Like a lot of like a lot of people in that era ended up reading Tim Ferriss's book, and that sort of like planted the seed of like, what am I doing? And got sort of like this almost like a feeling of career claustrophobia, even
Mhm.
though I was happy in my job and liked the people I was working with and stuff. And then, quit that job, traveled Asia with my girlfriend at the time, and rode a motorbike around, like went to Thailand and Vietnam, Burma, Cambodia, and then didn't know what I wanted to do. Self-published my first book, which is basically about everything I learned growing that agency in an account manager role, which was mastering account management. Kind of took on whoever would hire me for about a year or two, doing like random consulting and saying, here's what I would do to help you grow your firm. And like, there were just people I had no business helping. There was like the owner of a shipping company, a tech company that I barely understood what they did. But then in the mix were agencies, and that was like the world that I knew, and I could help them, and they needed the most help. And then started Sales Schema as a fractional new business team. Since then, we've worked with 120 agencies. In the last year, we've pivoted from a done for you to like a training and coaching model. So that's kind of my background. Now we're mostly showing sales teams how to set up outbound and how to go out and get appointments and that sort of thing.
Love it. Love it. I mean, you're speaking my language and I'm super excited to dig in. Thank you so much for sharing. So, when we were talking about topics and what we're going to talk about today, one of the things that you had mentioned that feels very natural to you is this idea of really being able to look at the big picture. And one of the ways that you had commented that you do that, and please correct me if I say anything that doesn't resonate, like just speak up, but is that you really have this ability to look to the past and look at how is that going to impact or lead you into the future. Is that how you would describe it?
Yeah, that's totally fair. And I'll just say that it's not that I'm like this oracle that I always get it right. And it's also not that, and I also will say that it's not always like the right thing. I think a lot of the times like it can have positive or negative effects. There's a lot of people I talk to where they're like, okay, Dan, like I just need to know how to set up this LinkedIn widget. I don't need to know the history of why this matters. But that is like the tendency I have is to go to the past to figure out the present and the future. Yeah.
And what would you say though is the major benefit to you to be able to do that? Like how have you been able to use that in your life and in your business and specifically with your clients where it has made an impact? And so I get that, it's not going to be for everyone. That's fine. But those places where it really does make that impact, what are the benefits of it?
It's a really good question, and I'm sort of like thinking through this in real time. So
Yeah.
I'll like think out loud. I think part of it is honestly like building motivation and energy through meaning. I'm a big believer in like meaning over other things. Like if read the Viktor Frankl book and that sort of thing. And I think part of that is like knowing where you are in space and time. So it can be something that's getting through kind of the regularness of life and the mundanity of work. And then like in our context, it might be sales prospecting or setting up, going over a list or writing an email template, something that's boring and figuring or something that we know to work or we know to not work, and then being able to explain like how did we get here, like the Talking Head song, like what's changed, why is this sort of email resonant when a year ago or 2 years ago, this wouldn't have worked, or vice versa. This thing that worked 2 years ago on the marketing or sales front, this sort of copy, this style doesn't work anymore. Like what changed? And sometimes we don't know. Sometimes it's just kind of reading into the abyss and reading into chaos, and that's a big part of it. But other times you can kind of like retrace your steps, I think. I think you could probably broad frame like we're looking at it through a sales and marketing and making more money for companies lens. But I'm
Hmm.
sure that there's like artists and musicians and like clothing designers that are probably looking at similar cultural artifacts to figure out like how did we get here? Like what's downstream or what's upstream of this. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I love what you just said about like being able to look at something and go like this, based on history, like this is why this works and or let's figure out what has changed and why it doesn't work anymore, which I think as a business owner, I mean, I'm speaking for myself here, it can be one of the most frustrating things to feel like, gosh, this worked for so long. What's
Yeah.
changed? Like what happened? And or like all of a sudden, there's these things that you're having to do you didn't have to do before and or where you can go back and go like let's look at what has worked legacy and how can you bring that forward into the future. Like I love all of this from a concept.
Yeah.
And so when you're looking at something like that, and let's take it from maybe the avenue of figuring out like something that has worked for so long but isn't working now. When you're looking at that, like if I was to step into your shoes and I get to be you for a day, like lucky me, and I want to think like you and behave like you, and I'm challenged with this idea of trying to figure out like why is this no longer working? What's your thought process there? Like what are some things that you do?
Yeah. So first off, I would just caution people and say like my normal way of thinking may not always be the right way. Like you may the reason there may be an Occam's razor to things, and the reason something isn't working may often be less sexy or interesting than what I tend to do. So like it might be because you were doing something that used to work and you got busy or lazy and you stopped doing that thing, right?
Mhm.
That's usually what's going on. I think that we run into this a lot with with marketing agencies where they're like, the economy's down or the presidential election or this, that. And I'm like, maybe, or maybe you just like were doing a lot of outreach and going to events and doing all these things. And then you stopped for whatever reason. And now you're seeing the effect of that 90 days later. That's probably what happened when you look back. And I see that in my own sales efforts. I'm like, we did this much activity and then downstream of that, we got whatever effect we've gotten. So I just want to say that disclaimer there,
Yeah,
and I may have
that's
lost.
totally fair. Totally fair.
Yeah, but I may have lost your question. Which will can you would you sorry, would you
Yeah,
mind?
so if I'm stepping in for you as
Yeah,
like from a thought process and I am going like this was working and it's not working now.
yeah,
How am I going to figure out how do I then bring that into the future? Like what's the thought process that you go
yeah,
through?
yeah. That's great. So let's say you've cleared off the usual contenders, and you're like, something has changed in my market or with my company, or like something that used to work that didn't, whatever it is. I think it's sort of thinking about, the people that you might be interacting with, and then what's changed in terms of how they're thinking and how they're making decisions. This is context dependent, so I'm thinking in the context of prospecting and sales, like in a
Perfect.
world.
Yeah.
And so there's gonna be different explanations for different situations, obviously. But for our market, for agencies, I think that to give an example, like what we tend to see is historically we're in kind of like a trust recession now. That's not my term; other people have said it. But due to, what I think, and this is going to go back through history and a little bit high level, is like we've gone through these different periods of different things becoming valuable, where we went from, resources being valuable, like farming, to land, and then the 20th century, or 19th century was capital was
Hmm.
valuable.
Right.
And then we got into information being valuable, which was the 20th century. And now we're moving into something else, and we don't really know what it is yet. And a lot of the value, a lot of like this uptick of growth that we've experienced happened because of inventions that happened in a very small window of time. And these are not my ideas. I think like people like Eric Weinstein or Thiel talk about this stuff a lot. But like between 1880 and 1920, we got most of the technology that makes our lives different than the Middle Ages, right? The reason like I'm in New York, it's 30 degrees and cold out right now, while like the air conditioner or heater rather that's keeping me warm was invented in that time period.
Hmm.
So what we have is the situation where like the internet and information technology has delivered a lot for us, but we don't know how much more value there is left to be extracted from it. And it could be massive. It could be game changing with AI, or it could just be continually disillusioning for people. And I think because of that scenario, there is a real dearth or like a real drought of trust, right?
Hmm.
So that's the massive, I warned everyone that I'm going to be crazy about this, but
I'm loving it. So keep going. Like I'm so in.
yeah.
Yeah.
So well, thank you. So that's the thing that I think is upstream of everything else, right? Where we
Mhm.
don't, there's not a lot of shared experience anymore. We don't know. There's no, you can't really bow out of it, and even if you could, it's not going to solve the problems that we're up against. So like the only way out is through, kind of thing. At least that's what I believe.
Hmm.
Um, and I think so that's the high level. To zoom down to like the day to day and what that means for like our agency clients that are selling programmatic advertising, or the tech client that's selling a widget or whatever, is you're up against just this like constant lack of trust and disillusionment. So anyway, to bring this down to like your original question was like, what do you actually do with this, Dan? The bets that we've made as a company is that the stuff that's going to be valuable is the stuff that has been valuable, which is that which is inherently scarce, right? So not going to be super valuable, like if to give an example, is like just personalizing stuff and saying, "Hey, Nikki, here's all this stuff I know about you. I'm going to regurgitate it back to you," because that's going to become abundant through AI. So the
Right.
stuff that's scarce in our experience is commonality. Like, what do I have in common with you that not everyone has in common with you? And that could be on a business or a personal level, right? So It could be very basic, like, hey, I saw you're in Boise. I just got back from vacation there. We went to these places. Or it could be something that's much more specific, like I saw you used to work for this company. We've done a lot of work with them over the years, and we should probably talk. I think that that sort of it's a weird, complex problem because that is going to be like being able to solve that problem is going to be empowered by AI and technology, but its effectiveness is also like antithetical to that. And the reason it works is because it's a pattern interrupt against that sort of thing. So hopefully that makes some kind of sense. I don't know.
Well, I'm going to say some things back here. And so again, please correct me. So this is for the audience. Some of the stuff that I am picking up here and of course want to dig into is this idea of, trust. What did you call it? Trust and disillusionment, but you
Trust
called it
recession. Yeah,
trust
not my
recession.
phrase. I
Thank
don't know
you.
where it comes from originally, but it's one that I borrowed a lot.
I wrote it down, but now I have so many notes that I'm like, oh, here it is. I know I see it on my notes because I'm like, keep going. There's so much good stuff. And so when you know that we're in a trust recession, one of the things that you really have to start to look for is a way to differentiate yourself. And that means that you have to go back to those things that are inherently scarce. And the one example that you gave us is commonality, right? And so if you can start to look for ways for creating this commonality and not even creating it, but actually, I guess you're not creating it. What you're doing is having it be an authentic thing that we have in common and speaking to it. Now you have the ability to maybe capture somebody's attention when there's this huge, barrier that you're having to overcome, which is this trust recession. How does that land for you? Please correct and
Yeah,
comment.
I think that's right. And I think that one thing that might be like tangential to what I was saying and your recap is like I think that we want to think that of everything as like this objective North Star. Like if there's entrepreneurs listening and they've started a business, I'm going for this particular thing. But I know, and you might know from having dozens of sales calls, that like the things that people want long term change over periods of time. I don't mean like on an individual basis. I mean like on a macro cohort sort of trend basis. Like I'll give you an example. I've had Sales Schema for 10 years. I've been on thousands of sales calls now selling services to agency owners. In the first 1 to few years, most of what I heard was, I want to scale my company to the moon. I want to make gazillions of dollars and that sort of thing. Now, what I hear is, I want to sell my agency in 3 to 5 years or
Mm,
2 to 3 years, right? So what happened? Like, there's obviously something mimetic going on, right? Which is like people want what other people want. And because it's something that's so major where you'd think that, oh, it's so individual and everybody has their own, like original goals, but there's obviously like these trends that happen. And I think that it's good to know what those are. So like if you are selling into a particular group, you know how the past is affecting the present and the future, basically.
okay. I love this. This idea of paying attention to the trends, understanding how they are the same or different from the past. Is that true?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay. And then, but like the example that you just gave of that, originally 10 years ago, it was all about scale. And that was like the big trend word, I would say, because that's kind of, I've been in business now for 11 years too. And it was like everything was about scale, scale, scale. And
Yeah,
then it was now, and actually, I talked to a lot of business owners that are thinking about this idea of selling the business and like, do you build like built to sell, right? Which is really popular book. People, it's like, are you actually building a business that you can sell at some point?
right.
So I love that you commented on those two things because those really resonate of like, yeah, I've heard those. I also in my own business see different things that clients are now more focused on when I get this more, maybe more micro, of getting more into the micro of like, what do they really want me to either show them and or help them when it comes to the like sales conversation and what it was. 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, or frankly, even a year ago, I'm starting to see things are shifting in the things that they're wanting me to focus on with them.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I think it's a really good example where it's like I was trained in sales and let's call it like when 2011, 2012, and I like fell into a sales role without taking ownership over it. Got trained up in like Sandler, right, which is a
Yep.
classic sales training method.
Yep.
And everything was about like just get them on a call and like get to close on the call. Don't do this email jockeying thing. Limit the amount of information that's projected outside of the call. And that's gradually changed a lot where it's like now and I believe that for years, and I don't believe it as much anymore for me personally. And there's different schools of thought on this, but in that I think the process of like selling and educating and all this sort of thing, I think it's changing. I think like a lot, and to get tactical, a lot more of the sales that we're seeing work and a lot of like what we're doing is like using Loom and like building connections through that. And you're having, go here, I need you to read this and consume this information first. You get on that call, the person hasn't consumed the information. It's like, well, do I want to spend 30 minutes with you or an hour with you just wasting time? Like, not so much because there's so much else to do and there's so many other distractions now. So these things just they move and there's trends. And I think like the hard thing is being able to balance the timeless stuff that works with how the world's changing, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Now this makes me want to ask you. So I still truly believe that that everything that I teach is based on rapport, that you have to have rapport with people in
Yeah.
order to earn their business. And to me, rapport builds relationship, and people tend to want to buy from people that they have some kind of a relationship with, that they're not just like a dollar sign, on my forehead, and that's all you care about. And you're just trying to get the money and move on. Um, and I think if relationship selling is part of, if you're looking for long-term clients,
Yeah.
that still does require actually building some kind of relationship and connection. It isn't just here's the link, buy it or don't.
Yeah. I think it's a combination. I mean, I think that if anything costs over roughly four figures, people are going to expect to have some sort of relationship with the buyer, right? That's the thing that, there's exceptions and it's relative. Like four figures to a, enterprise company doesn't mean the same thing as
Yeah.
somebody else. But that I would agree with. I just think that the way that people are looking to consume information is changing, right? So that's
Mm,
where I'm kind of seeing um, the hybrid approach work a lot better, both for like protecting time for both parties in a lot of ways. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So you're not getting on sales calls with what I call the tire kicker.
Well, the tire kicker, or if you are, like for us, like we're on with plenty of tire kickers. I just don't want to be on two, three, four calls with tire kickers.
Right.
Right. That's the main, and neither should they. Like
Right.
there's plenty of options for them to learn, for us to help them, just not on calls necessarily. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you talk about the hybrid, I'm kind of going all over the place with you, but when you talk about
Yeah.
the hybrid in particular, what is an example of this where you're saying like here's some content I want them to consume or have made available for them to consume before we get on a call? Like we do you mind sharing an example of what that is?
Yeah, and we're always trying new things. I think
Yeah.
that what we've what we've kind of gotten this to is like a 30-minute video training that lays out like our worldview on outreach specifically and what we and kind of back to the historical, like what we think has changed and where it's going and what it means for agency teams and all that sort of thing. So there's pros and cons to that. I think a lot of people won't watch that video,
Yeah.
but and if they don't watch it before the first call, it's not the end of the world, but they need to see that at some point. Otherwise, we're just going to blend in with everything else, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of the times, like at least for us personally, like what we've seen work is that that content needs to be part of the process sooner rather than later. And that training was once like an hour or more, and we've like finally cut it down. So now it's more digestible. But if we can't get somebody to watch the 30-minute training, like the chances of them, being down to invest in a training offer, which is what we're mainly selling now, are pretty slim. But if somebody was selling a done for you engagement, or our clients selling agency services, like the people hiring them are just purely like, get this off my plate yesterday.
Right.
So it may be more about, a one pager, or maybe a little bit more live, and like, hey, we're going to just get through this on a call. And we also have a live element of teaching as well that we go through like later in the process. But
Yeah.
that's kind of what we're finding to work lately.
Okay. I love that. This idea, I just want to ask, because you had mentioned like sharing your worldview, right? Like this
Yeah.
is part of kind of who we are as a business and our beliefs and how we show up and service. Do you think that also speaks to this commonality thing that you're speaking to? Because if somebody's watching this and they go, "Oh, this feels aligned or aligned with my own worldview," then that makes it like that much of a stronger connection of them wanting to maybe then choose your company over a competitor.
Yeah, I do, and I think that, like in my experience from also just talking with agencies that are getting progressively more specialized, is like that's becoming sort of table stakes to have this sort of perspective, right? So I'm very much seeing this in terms of like a services agency lens, but
Hmm.
you could probably broad frame it other places. But I think the value of just simply like doing the work is going to keep going down, right? As AI becomes more prevalent, as the world
Yeah.
becomes flatter. So I think like the idea of having a more defined perspective that turns some people on or off is
Yeah.
going to become like just table stakes.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a big fan of repelling people as fast as possible if they're not in alignment, so as to
Yeah.
not waste their time and not waste mine, so that
Yeah.
I have room in my schedule and in my thought process to really attract the right people. So I feel like
Right.
maybe that's the same here.
Right. And I got this wrong for so many years where I would spend so much energy, like until I was just hoarse of these calls, like trying to sell people on like outbound, like, hey, hey, you should try to like reach out to people you want to do business with instead of just waiting. And now it's like, if somebody just doesn't think that's for them, then it's like, I'm not going to convince you, and that's okay. And
Yeah. Yeah.
try something else for a while, see if it works. And in so much as I can convince them, I'm not going to do it live on a call. It's maybe through, a LinkedIn post or something. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
I always say it's not your job in sales to convince somebody. Like people have a convincer strategy. It's not your job to convince them. They'll convince themselves by being able to consume content, by the things that you say. Like
yeah.
like most people, if you say to them, "I'm going to convince you," they'll draw a line in the sand and be like, "You won't change my mind no matter what you say or do." But
Well, it's
they can,
funny.
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just going to say, like, it's funny because people will sometimes say that, where it's like, convince me, and it's like, let's
Yeah.
just get time back. So, yeah.
I always tell this story about somebody coming up to me just before I was to go on stage and was like, "Can you sell me this pen?" I'm sure in sales you've heard this before, right? He's like, "Can you sell a pen?" And so I took his pen and I said, "Are you in the market for a pen?" And he said, "No." And I just threw it and walked away. I was like, let's not waste our time then. Like, I'm not here to
That's good.
convince
That's
you.
that's the right answer. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, I feel like you've given us a lot here. I have a lot to think about just on some of the stuff that you've said, but I want to comment to the audience on a few more things here. So, this idea of really paying attention to trends and just because it worked in the past doesn't mean it's going to still work now. What are your clients saying to you? What are the things that they're commenting on? And is your message and is your offer kind of speaking to that? So I liked this example that you gave about scaling versus now it's about selling or whatever it is for the clients that you work with. But I think that's another thing to really pay attention to when you're speaking about your offers. Like, what is the trend right now? What's the thing that people are looking for?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's probably a few things. I think that people really, back to the trust issue. I think people really want to know that you're like speaking their language. I actually just did a goofy little LinkedIn post called "Do you know any secret languages?" Which is that if you are specialized enough, you'll actually sort of develop a secret language with the prospects you're selling to, in the same way that like my mom's from Appalachian, Virginia. When she's with family, she code switches and immediately goes to the accent. And if you're from a certain region, you might do that, like
Hmm.
Boise or Chicago or whatever. I grew
Yeah.
up in North Virginia where nobody has any culture and there's no accent. So it's not the same. But anyway, I can say that because I grew up there. But so I'll give you an example. Like if you are selling to marketing agencies or like we have, like I know that they have been burned and have been promised the world from lead generation companies. So
Yeah.
we don't say the word lead, we say like prospects. And other words like new business are very specific to the agency world. And I think that's a great example of one because it's like this remnant term from a bygone era where agencies could rely on like five accounts that would be with them for 20 years, like in Mad
Hmm.
Men. And now that's like way gone, and like agencies have to win clients constantly. But new business, as if it's different than other business, like is still remains. So like just being able to say that in email outreach or in our information um goes a lot further. And it's almost like you could step on a landmine by using the wrong terms from not knowing an industry well enough, right? So
Hmm.
if we said we're going to get you 50 leads a week, we would be immediately put in the lead gen ghetto, right? Because it's like so if you're listening to this, there's a version of that for your market. And if you think that you're going to be able to learn five secret languages at once for like five of those markets, it's going to be very difficult, I think. So I may have lost your question a little, but that's one thing that comes to mind.
I think that was incredibly helpful, and I'm super glad that you shared it because I think that that kind of speaks to this idea of, you hear people always say like niche down, or I always say niche down, but I think I say it wrong. Like, know your niche. But I haven't really actually heard somebody talking about the secret language from that standpoint. Now, I know from my background in neurolinguistic programming that the words that you say matter.
Right.
And the words words invoke images for people, right? They get an image in their mind of what that word means. And just the difference between lead and prospect, somebody might say, well, that's kind of the same thing, but it's not
Yeah.
in depending on who you're speaking to. So if you understand who you are speaking to, you want to make sure you're using the language that really kind of speaks to the heart of. Because if you say to me, your example is perfect. If you showed up to me and said, Nikki, I'm going to give you 50 leads a month, I would be like, no, thanks. That sounds like garbage to me. Like 50 leads, those are like, that's nothing. But at 50 prospects, that's a very different conversation. So,
Right, exactly. And the thing is, it's like there's so much rational. I think in the book The Challenger Sale, they use the term rational drowning that we all do, like especially in B2B, that we sometimes like as B2B people, we like lose the emotional element of words and how they can have just completely subjective meanings, and we think that they're real, where it's like, oh, there's the subjective definition of prospect versus lead. And then all of a sudden there's these words that get just invented out of thin air, like rev ops. Like what does that mean? It's just something that somebody invented to sell something
yeah.
yesterday. It's
Yeah.
like all these words are just they're just used, and they have a cultural context and they mean different things in different industries. And you just have to know how to navigate them,
Yeah.
basically. Yeah.
But I think just from a listener standpoint is like, are you paying attention to
Yeah.
this language? And if you're not, it's probably time to, and really maybe making a concentrated effort to capture that language so that when you are crafting your outbound messages and when you are reaching out or having conversations with people, that again, it's you're speaking their language. This is, again, so NLP for me, but it's
Yeah.
such an important part of, people have certain words that they use that mean something to them. And even if you go, well, this other word's the same thing, it doesn't invoke the same image, the same feeling, all of that. And so it's such an important thing. So I'm super glad you brought that into the conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and the NLP thing is, I think that whole element's very underappreciated in B2B because everyone's just obsessed with what they can measure and that sort of thing. And obviously some of it's measurable. My head goes to like there's this anecdote in that Cialdini book where he talks about doing marketing for maybe it was like a large hospital group and how they avoid any terminology that sounds like remotely violent. So they can't use the word target. And there were some other examples that I'm blanking on, but that I've just that came to mind.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I remember one time being in a talk and using a very poor choice for a word for a phrase that I use, and I could see my audience cringe when I said it. And it was right after something had happened in the news, and I just felt like, oh my gosh, these people are looking at me like she's so unaware. And she just used this term, which is a really, I'm not even going to say what it is, but it's such a common phrase that people use, but it's not one that I use anymore because I could
Yeah.
just tell I totally turned off my audience using this phrase that, it's common language, but not appropriate. So really paying attention to that stuff too. This is awesome.
It's easy to make those mistakes on a stage. There's a lot going on. And you have
There
to
is a
come
lot. There is a
quickly.
lot going on. Thank you for the grace there. I'll take it. Okay, so I feel like you have given us a ton to work with. Is there anything I didn't ask you about that you thought I really want to talk about this in relation to kind of where we started about how you can look to the past and use that to bring it into the future?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that this is probably another tangent, but the way I personally tend to see things and the way that the world kind of like slots into place with me is that um most of what we see now is downstream of technology and technology is like downstream of scientific breakthrough. So I think it sort of goes in order from like scientific breakthrough to technology to economy to culture, and then politics is like downstream of the culture. And so there, I'm kind of like a loose technological empiricist. Um, it's not that simple. Like there can be reflexive effects that go back and forth between those things. Like culture can produce certain technology, but I think that's sort of what we're seeing now. And if you think when we go back to the earlier example, we were talking about where like, hey, it used to all be about scaling your company to the moon, and now people just want to like quit and retire.
Yeah.
I think part of that is downstream of just the economy. It's just,
Yeah.
the demographics and interest rates and that kind of thing. So I think so I don't know if the problem is there's not always going to be a direct like tactical application for that, but that's kind of how I tend to see where we are. And we haven't had a huge tech breakthrough other than AI, and that's a big one. And it looks like it could do a lot, but it could also do things that are not so good. So we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, we will see where it goes. I was just listening to a podcast this morning and they were talking about this new, maybe it's not new to anybody listening, but to me, it was a new version of AI that is already upsetting kind of what everybody thought AI was supposed to be and what it was supposed to cost and what it was required, in order for it to run and the money invested in all this. And then here's this new solution that's open source. And anyway, it was just like, oh, look, here's this new breakthrough of something that everybody was like, oh no, this is what it is. And now there's
Right.
like, this is it. Now it's something different. We'll see. So
Well, I mean, the time frames we're looking at for things to get very strange are not 5 or 10 years. It's like 1 to 2,
yeah.
where you will have probably AI employees that you just talk to on Slack that you can see faces and voices. Like that's going to be very strange. And a lot more than that. So
Yeah, yeah, it's an interesting time that we live in. Dan, thank you so much for your time. I usually like to, if you're willing, just ask like a couple personal questions so people get to know you a little bit better as we wrap this up. This is what I call my lanyard section. It's the little something extra. So a little something extra about Dan, if that's okay.
cool. Yeah. Sounds like fun.
Okay, good. So my first question is, what is something that brings you joy right now?
Oh, my son. Yeah. He's,
Yeah,
he's 14 months. So it's kind of magical time.
that is a magical time.
Yeah.
Walking? Is he walking?
Almost. He's big. So he's doing it slowly. He's
Yeah,
taking it
yeah. That's so
any day now
fun.
kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. And what is something people would be surprised to learn about you?
Oh man. Something people would be surprised to learn. Um, Can we edit this out? I just got to think for a second.
Yeah, yeah, no problem. No
Yeah,
problem. And we can
it's a
skip
good
it too.
question.
We can
Yeah.
skip it.
No, it's a really good. I wish I had a better answer. I'm trying to think. Um, yeah, I might have to skip just because I can't think of anything
I kind of want
off
to
the top
ask
of my
if you're
head.
a musician because I see some
Yeah, I mean, I just don't know if it's surprising.
okay.
Because a lot of people have guitars and stuff. Oh, okay. So do you want me to just like restart the
Yeah,
answer?
yeah. Yeah, just what's something people would be surprised to learn about you?
I hosted a college radio show for years, and I was the hip hop director at KZSC, which is Santa Cruz's radio station,
Wow.
which I think has helped me, have a podcast and do a lot of this stuff more than like the classes I took through One Bloodshot Eye, basically.
You definitely have a really cool voice. So I could see radio for sure in your past. You've
Yeah, I
got that
appreciate it.
like radio voice. My gosh. Okay. What's something exciting going on in your business right now?
Oh, it seems like a lot of things. I mean, pivoting from to a training model is really exciting. It's more fun for us because we get to see these like little incremental wins people get as opposed to just like sending them a lead or something.
Yeah.
Just new content channels, so doing a lot more on YouTube. And honestly, like back to the AI thing, like messing around with tools like Clay, and just seeing how how powerful these things are, and just like it's kind of like being a kid in front of a computer game again,
Hmm.
which is fun. So those are a few things that come to mind.
I love it. And what is the best way for a listener to get in touch with you if you're open to that?
Yeah, of course. Just Dan at saleschema.com is a great way. I'm on LinkedIn, just Dan Englander somewhere over there.
Yeah.
And our company's saleschema.com, and we have like video trainings there and a bunch of other stuff. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much for your time and energy and what you put into this. I really learned I feel like I learned some really good things from you today, and I've got some things to think about as a result. So appreciate you.
Likewise, Ziggy, this is a lot of fun, really interesting interview, and excited to have you on our show in a week or so.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it. And for you, the listener, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for showing up. If you found some part of this interview inspiring, helpful in some way, please reach out to me and Dan and let me know. Let us know what was your big takeaway from today's episode. I am wishing you continued success in all that you're doing. Have a great rest of your day.